morning, Ohio State fans, and welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Wednesday, September 3rd. We're in the middle of the week now, about equally away from the Ohio State-Texas game, and looking forward to the Grambling State game this weekend. And to help us kind of finish our debriefing from what was a brilliant win for the Buckeyes, I'm here with our deputy editor, Dan Hope. Dan, are you still basking in the glow of victory after a successful debut for Ohio State football last weekend?
Well, I don't know if I'm supposed to be basking or eating crow after I picked Texas. I think we both picked Texas. I think we're both in that boat. So
we did, but the letter of the law with the score predictions is it's only about points, and I expected a shallow total, and so I did just fine. So it was a nice emotional hedge for me. And as I've professed several times on this show already, I'm now 0 for 3 picking Ohio State their last 3 cracks at the number 1 overall team. So, I clearly don't know anything, and it's why I'm in the position that I'm in. But in any event, it was a good showing for Ohio State, and I was, never been more happy to be wrong. About as thrilling as you can get out of a 14-7 game. But there were plenty of surprises, as I talked about with Chase on Monday and talked about with Jones yesterday, and we were teasing film study, which will drop tomorrow, Thursday, on the YouTube channel. So make sure you're tuned in for that. But today I wanted to talk with you about another highly sought after bit of analysis that our site does that I've seen quoted elsewhere in the Buckeye media sphere since the in wake of the game, and that is the ever popular snap counts, which courtesy of you and our site data analyst Matt Guttridge, we got a nice tally of those after the game. I am curious. I'm going to ask you what your biggest surprise was. Surprise, on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. But before I get your take on the snap counts for the offensive side, I do want to offer what my biggest surprise was and see if it matches up with yours, because obviously the biggest acquisition in the transfer portal that Ohio State had within the last cycle was Max Klare from across the conference out of Purdue at the tight end position. Now, I've always been someone that has poo-pooed the tight end position at Ohio State, not because I don't want to see them be successful, but because my experience as a fan has just shown me that we will consistently see them used more often as blockers than route runners or big facets in the passing game. And that certainly ended up being the case against Texas. A lot of people were eager to see Max Klare as what was commonly anointed as the most promising pass-catching tight end in the entire sport going into this season after his success at Purdue last season. He only ended up playing 23 snaps, and that was the third most of all of Ohio State's tight ends on Saturday. And I think if you told anybody that Klare would see the third most time at tight end in Ohio State's opener prior to the game, they would have looked at you like you were living on Mars or something all off season. So did that shock you as much as it shocked me? And was that the most shocking development for you relative to snap counts on offense, or was there something else that caught your eye?
Well, I certainly didn't expect that. If you had asked me going in, I would have predicted that Max Klare would play the most snaps among tight ends, not the third most. Now, I think a lot of that had to do with the game plan, with how conservative and run-heavy Ohio State was on offense. I think Will Kacmarek and Bennett Christian are Ohio State's 2 best run-blocking tight ends. So with how much the Buckeyes kind of decided to play ball control, run the ball, that's why those guys were in there a lot on 12 personnel, why Max Klare didn't play as much. But, if that was a trend that continued, that would certainly be a surprise. If Max Klare is not a guy who's playing more snaps than, less than half the snaps he played in this game, that certainly surprised me. So I would say that was my biggest surprise on offense, but I think there's probably a few more of it. Even just going along with that, if you take receivers and tight ends, how many people would have guessed that Will Kacmarek would play the second most snaps among receivers and tight ends in this game? He played a couple more snaps than Carnell Tate because there were some plays where they had 3 or 4 tight ends out there on the field, and Jeremiah Smith was the only wide receiver. So I'm not surprised Will Kacmarek played a significant role. I am surprised he played more than Carnell Tate. I am surprised that both Max Klare and Brandon Inniss played only 23 snaps. I would have thought we would have seen at least one of those guys out there on the field on most plays as kind of that number 3 receiving threat. Instead, in this game, with how many heavy sets Ohio State used, they both combined to play just 46 out of the 59 offensive plays in the game. So I think that was a little bit surprising. I wouldn't have guessed going into the game that CJ Donaldson would end up playing twice as many snaps as James Peoples. I thought James Peoples would start at running back. I thought it would be a more even split of carries. Now, I do think CJ Donaldson was the better running back on Saturday, so I think it ultimately made sense that he got more of a carries, but it'll be interesting to see how that development continues over the course of a season. Does it become more of an even split, or do we continue to see CJ Donaldson take the lion's share of the carries at that position? And then I think the one other surprise would be, I would have guessed that Ethan Anianwa, the first position he would have rotated in at, would be at right tackle, but he ended up not playing any snaps at right tackle. Phillip Daniels played every snap at right tackle. I think played quite well. I think honestly was their best offensive lineman in the game on Saturday. And as a result, Ethan Anianwa ended up only rotating in at right guard. He was in for one full drive, which was the first touchdown drive of the game. Tegra Shabola played the rest of the game at right guard. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, the snap counts at every position are going to look way different this week against Grambling than they are against Texas, because most likely a lot more backups are going to get in there. But it'll be interesting to see as the season progresses, which of these things remain trends and which of them kind of prove to be unique to the game plan against Texas.
Yeah, you had alluded to towards the end of camp that you were expecting a similar timeshare between Peoples and Donaldson to what we got with Judkins and Henderson. I asked you about that the very first episode when we rebranded the Dubcast a handful of weeks ago. So it didn't necessarily surprise me to see Donaldson get more, just especially given the conversation I had with Jones about him anticipating that Donaldson was going to kind of gradually take over or establish himself as the clear lead option at running back as the season went on. It did kind of surprise me to see him get the first crack at it, and it did surprise me to see him double up Peoples on the snap. So to get as much burn as he did, not necessarily more burn than Peoples, was surprising for me. And yeah, I mean, even though the thing with Klare still ended up being the most stunning to me relative to how much burn the other two options got in Cass Merrick and Bennett Christensen, I think it makes a little bit more sense when you take into consideration what you mentioned with the game plan leaning more conservative towards running the ball, and then also what Ryan Day talked about post game in terms of not wanting to, I for lack of a better term, just let it rip with saying, try to keep things relatively simple. You would imagine as they start to open it up a little bit more for saying over the course of the season, Klare's going to play a significant role in how the passing game becomes more sophisticated and more threatening for the defense. So I would expect Klare to get a little bit more involved as the playbook begins to open up as the season comes along. And even though I, kind of just sandbagged the tight end position in the grand scheme of Ohio State's offense in recent years and under Ryan Day, we have seen him like to go to them quite a bit in the college football playoff. So assuming Ohio State is a lock for the college football playoff after the win that they just had, even though we're more than a few months away from that, I would think that Klare is going to factor pretty considerably into those plans when the time comes. Relative to the defense, I wonder, looking at the snap counts, obviously the big emerging line coming out of this game, or not line, but the storyline, I guess, coming out of this game is what is the health going to be for Kenyatta Jackson, who was projected to be one of the best starters on the defensive line for Ohio State this season. He gets hurt in the second half, doesn't return. At this point, we don't know if he's going to be back for Grambling State or not, but I think Ryan Day has indicated that he's working back towards that point. It's not a long-term injury, which is good news, but in the first half, especially given that we saw Caden Curry play pretty much the entire game from his starting position, we didn't really see a lot of another big name that was in the transfer portal for Ohio State this past offseason, Bo Atkinson, who's probably pretty grateful he left North Carolina in light of recent events. And CJ Hicks didn't rotate in until the second half himself, but had a nice presence, I think, late in the game, especially in the fourth quarter for Ohio State. What I'm wondering is, had Jackson not gotten hurt, given how much Curry played, do you think that Ohio State would have predominantly leaned on their starters in that game as opposed to rotating in Atkinson or Hicks? Or do you think they were just playing strictly out of necessity given what happened with Jackson?
I do think that Jackson certainly would have played a higher percentage of snaps, probably a very similar percentage to what Curry played, which was 59 out of 67. It did seem like before Jackson's injury, they were leaning on those two heavily as their top defensive ends. So certainly when you look at the final snap counts, Bo Atkinson getting 35, CJ Hicks getting 19, both of those numbers probably would have been lower if Kenyatta Jackson didn't get hurt. But, that'll be another trend that's going to be interesting to watch over the course of the season. I mean, I think certainly like these next couple of weeks, regardless of whether Kenyatta Jackson plays, I mean, I think he's probably close to returning. There's no reason to rush him back against Grambling. So, I mean, personally, I would guess it's probably more likely than not he doesn't play, even if he can play, just because why rush him back against Grambling? But either way, I think you're going to see a lot of rotation at that position against opponents like Grambling and Ohio. The question is going to be when you get to games like Penn State and Michigan, are they going to lean heavier on the Curry-Jackson tandem, or is it going to be more of a heavy rotation? I think a lot of that's probably going to depend on how Atkinson and Hicks continue to develop over the course of a season. But like you said, I mean, CJ Hicks making a big play there on the fourth down, forcing the stop that Caleb Downs made to clinch the game. I think Bo Atkinson had a few good moments as well. I think they both had some things to build off that can enable them to kind of expand those roles as the season progresses.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would think that in light of, what you kind of alluded to, that we're probably going to see some more depth get involved with Grambling State this weekend, assuming Ohio State's able to jump out to an early lead and keep Grambling State at bay. It'll just be more of an opportunity for the depth on this team to kind of reveal itself, albeit maybe not against the strongest opponent on Ohio State's schedule, but it is another stepping stone in the season, and it'll give us an opportunity to kind of assess how deep Ohio State's rotation potentially could be, even if I think all things considered, we're probably looking towards a similarly conservative game plan, despite the fact that this is obviously not as much of a test as Texas is. We've seen it kind of be a theme for Ryan Day at this point, being not wanting to reveal your whole hand in terms of game planning early in the season, wanting to save your best stuff for late in the season when you're competing against those other contenders in the scheme of the college football playoff. I don't know how exciting it's going to be, but it should at least be entertaining if you like seeing Ohio State win, for better or worse. So I'll be looking forward to that on Saturday afternoon, and I'll be very grateful to you and the rest of the beat as always for keeping us informed on what's going to be happening before, during, and after the game. So we have that to look forward to, and thank you very much for tuning in to the 11 Dubcast, and we will be back tomorrow with the Thursday episode